So without further ado, for part 2 of this speech, I'll give it over to John Britton, Director, Product Marketing, EUC Security, VMware.
Thank you. Just a show of hands, how many people were here for Mr. Korn's presentation? Oh, good. So a quick slide here. I'm going to talk about end users, devices, and how they go about things. And I thought the nursery was appropriate for the data center, but I didn't want to imply or infer that your end users were babies, right? So along this line, I think of our end users as teenagers, right? They're independent. So maybe I was a bad parent, but when my 3 kids were really young and infants, I knew that I could put them in the crib and I at least could take a break for 15 minutes. I've got 3 teenagers. My oldest is a 17-year-old girl, and there's no crib space for her, right? She's highly independent. She doesn't listen to my rules, believe in a curfew. Grades are now, as a senior in the last semester of high school, rather unimportant to her, and it can be very frustrating, right? And we have these problems with our end users, right? Because now our end users are empowered, this consumerization of IT. Everybody can go out and now basically afford the iPad or the Android device that they want, or bring in the Surface Pro and do what they want to do, or do what they feel they need to do to be productive, right? So we're computing anywhere, anyhow, with any device. And on top of that, data's now king, right? And I'll talk about ransomware here in a few minutes, but truly what we're trying to do is protect all those datas. And Tom talked about, okay, isolation, micro-segmentation. None of this is important, right? Just like telling my daughter she needs to make sure she has at least half a tank of gas in the car. It falls on deaf ears, right? So I found this nice little stat: 60% of employees would prefer to use a personal device for work or play, right? And so she plays soccer, so I get the whole personalization, I get the whole BYOD, because when she's at a soccer game and there's halftime, I want to check my email, I want to be productive, I want to do different things, I want to increase my productivity. And I think that's what many of us do today. I think that's what many of our end users want to do. What that does, though, is increases some of the vulnerability. So 50% of organizations rely on their users to protect their personal devices or protect the data on that. But I also found another study where 70% of companies don't spend any time educating their end users, right? So again, going back to my daughter, I can talk to her about drunk driving and don't drink and drive, just give me a call. Or I live in Austin, so Uber's out of the question, which is horrible. But the real challenge is there's so many different things that I can warn her about. I just become I become the teacher on peanuts, right? Wah. And if you're a parent of teenagers, you have to balance out what noise you want them to hear and everything else, right? So going back to the enterprise and whatnot, right? So we have our end users, they're connecting to some network somehow now. How many of you guys are remote users? Actually don't go into an office. So that's me. I never go into the VMware office. Well, I should say never, but rarely. I've got 6 different devices, 6 different unique devices on my desktop. And on top of that, I'm connecting with multiple different applications, all back to, and I apologize, the little database icon that I have is a representation of Tom's data center. Right? So who's my teenager or user? And that's some of the real problems that we now have. Sorry, skipped ahead real quickly. I, as a user, and on my different devices, I've got different applications to do things. So I take notes on my Slate Pro because I'm tired of yellow pads. And I keep all those business notes, so when I'm talking to Tom or somebody else, they're all there, they're unsecure. When I'm traveling, I don't bring my Slate because I don't like the battery life on it, so I'm taking notes in Evernote, and then I merge those together. So I'm using many different tools and appliances to get me to feel more productive in how I'm doing things. Where did I go? And I've created my own shadow IT, right? And so you as an IT organization are figuring out, what is John doing? What are my end users doing? And it's the same thing with my teenage daughter. I really can't sit there and put her in a crib and have a nursery and understand from my wife or the nanny or whatever what's going on every day. I have to trust that she's doing the right thing at the right time, that she is where she should be and she's saying and representing herself appropriately. So I'm going to want to boil this down into 5 different points. So from an end user perspective, within the enterprise, you have to think about who the user is, right? Are they employees? Are they contractors? You know, the metaphor back to my daughter is when she was an infant and we had play dates, we knew the 3 kids she played with. Now in high school, she's interacting with hundreds of kids. Some of those kids have different moral compasses than what I'd prefer, but they're all around, right? And we have to think about this from our user community within the enterprise. Are they contractors? Are they sales? Are they marketing? Are they privileged users, right? So, you know, least privilege here and whatnot. What type of devices are they going out with? So, you know, sorry, I'm just looking out in the audience to see if there's anybody that looks like they're still in college, and I don't think anybody is. You know, going back to, and I was telling Dennis about this earlier, is thank God I didn't grow up with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and digital cameras, right? Because I don't think VMware would hire me today. But our end users in the data center have these choices. They have the ability to go pick and choose what they want to, and they're getting smart. So I'm now talking to people that have said, hey, what can I use if I come to work at VMware? Can I bring my own MacBook? Can I bring my Windows 10 device? Can I bring Red Hat? And 15 years ago, VMware policy probably was no, we'll give you this ThinkPad and you'll like it and you'll enjoy it and you'll connect via Exchange. And I haven't been here that long, so correct me if I'm wrong. But it was very forced, and it was very no or yes. It was very binary in what was happening, right? The same thing with the applications, right? So are they thin apps, are they mobile apps, are they virtual apps? Are they apps that have been built in-house? Are they apps that have been downloaded from a known app store, if you will, on the iPhone? Is it from Google Play or Apple App Store? Or is it from some app store based in China because you're just too lazy or cheap to spend 99 cents on a device, right? So our network, so like I mentioned earlier, I work from my house. I'm very rarely on the VMware network. And your users are that way too. They're at a Starbucks, they're at a Pete's, they're at a Seattle's Best. They're at the RSA Conference network, right? And the RSA might be okay, but how many of you guys would actually open up your wireless connection at DEF CON or ShmooCon? It just doesn't happen because you're scared of it, right? And then the data, what are they doing with that data? And then finally, how do you build that policy framework? So between the user and the data, how is this all being used? And going through and understanding the best ways to generate and give access to that end user or that data for that particular user requires the analysis of these particular pieces of data. So are you at home on your personal device trying to access Salesforce.com? Is that an okay behavior for some users? And in some instances it might be, in some instances it might not be. So you need to evaluate and understand those pieces of information. And we do that at VMware through conditional access. And I learned about this the hard way. I said I never go into the office. I went in my first VMware office about 2 months ago. I was shipped my laptop, never knew the difference. So every day I would log in, I would have to go in and type my password in. If I wanted to go and access one of my personal devices, I had to pull out my RSA token, put the token in. So we had that different level. If it was on an unknown device on an unknown network, I had to jump through an RSA token to log in. A known device on an unknown network required my password. I went to the Palo Alto office one day, sat down, and it knew who I was. No password, nothing. Just able to gain access to all the different information. So we have conditional access. Make everything a little bit more restrictive the further away the end user goes from policy, and then try and steer them into policy. So going back to my teenage daughter, what have they done? Right? And on the IT side, we've talked about Heartbleed and Sony and Home Depot and all the latest ransomware pieces that are going in here. And this is about the devices and the applications that the end users are using, right? So what does the data say about security issues? So as opposed to Tom's talk, I'm talking more on the end user side and what they're doing and what they are bringing into the environment here, right? So I repeated this earlier, right? 50% of employees Employers will require employees to use their own devices. And this isn't the original device. This could be a device plus one or a device plus two, but they are showing up in droves on the enterprise. We did a survey a couple of months ago with a customer and found these numbers. So if I asked everybody today, do you know exactly how many devices are connected to your network or have network data on them, right? So the answer was they didn't know. They certainly didn't know that 91% of the devices had a bad version of Adobe on there, right? Because with today's model, it's up to the end user to say, yes, I'm going to accept this update. It's not a policy that's pushing those out. So you're more reliant on your end user. It's more reliant on me to tell my daughter, make sure the tank of gas is full before you go out. Don't call me, don't call AAA because you ran out of gas because you can't see the light that's gone on, right? Or have time to be bothered with the oil lights that's flashing, right? So the key challenges with knowing your users and what devices that they're bringing on are illustrated here. Data accuracy, timeliness, right? So how many devices are on my network? How many devices do I have? What do those devices look like? What's the posture? Is my iOS device running 10.2.4, I think is the latest one? Am I running Android 7? What's going on in that environment? You know, and then there's the huge barrier that we have between security and ops. Ops is sitting there fighting for productivity and efficiencies, where security is saying, no, let's lock everything down and make sure you're in a nice little simple box for the end user. So you have that conflict going on. The reaction time. So when you do have ransomware and you do have something that's propagating, trying to move laterally within the environment, how do you protect that? I had a job 20 years ago, and my first day, and they couldn't register me through HR because somebody had brought a big virus in and taken out every machine in the organization. So 5,000 employees were not able to use devices because they couldn't react. They didn't know where it was. They didn't have proper security hygiene. And today we have those opportunities. Tom mentioned the complex architectures and infrastructure and agents and everything that goes along with managing the data center. We have that problem also on the end user side, right? So how do we solve these? We need to be able to ask, know, and act. And all of this needs to be timely. We need to be able to understand when things are happening, what's going on, and then what's the appropriate reaction to this. And then the ransomware, solving a real world problem, right? So it's one of the biggest things, one of the biggest conversations that I get into on a regular basis when I'm out talking to customers and prospects. And just, I have a feeling everybody knows what ransomware is. You know, there's opportunity for the enterprise now. So I think in the news over the past 2 weeks, I've heard about 2 different hotels, one in the US and one in Europe, that their reservation systems became impacted by ransomware. And why? Because there's a real urgent need for the enterprise to pay that data. So the one in Europe happened on a Friday afternoon. Everybody was trying to check into a high-end hotel, right? If you can't check somebody in or reissue room keys or take their reservations or deposits, you're not making money on a busy weekend in a hotel, right? So all of these are really important for ransomware for the enterprise. And it goes back to the first piece is educating your end users. So going back to my teenage daughter, she's a really smart kid, has a 4.0. She's struggling in calculus. And I keep telling her, I'll get you a tutor. And she believes she can work herself out of her problem and the hole she's in. But she's stubborn and unwilling to realize that there's help out there. And I know everybody in the room is willing to give that education to their end users. Will the end user take you up on that? Do they think they know better, right? They're the stubborn teenager that just wants to do whatever they want to do all the time. So in addition to the end user training and education, and that's the hardest part, you know, no offense to Tom and all of the great work that they're doing there, but from a technology perspective, we can say no, but we still have the end user that's saying, I don't care, Dad, I'm gonna do what I want to do, right? So let's patch and secure the end user devices. Let's make sure that we don't have systems that are vulnerable to heartbleed. Let's make sure that we're not using SSL 1.0 or TLS 1.0 and making sure that we've got the right security posture in place as much as possible. Employ the zero trust with micro-segmentation, the least privileges. Make sure that we're not just thinking about the data center, we're thinking about the end user, because those end users are going to create havoc within your data center. So we talk about virtual desktops. So if you have a VDI solution and you can ensure that that master copy that's being distributed is appropriate, that the hygiene is correct, that the end users are getting just the tools that they need to and no other tools. So that if they want to go onto Chrome or Safari or Internet Explorer or Edge, they can do that in their own space and not the enterprise space. Man, am I rushing through this? No? Okay. Tom mentioned the micro-segmentation. Hopefully, I think everybody raised their hand that was there for this one, or for mine was at Tom's. And then the final part of this, so bringing up the story of my daughter. On Monday night, she slammed shut her calculus book and says, "I'm out of here," and got really frustrated. And I understand. So she went in her room, grabbed her shoes, unlocked the front door, and just took off. She didn't take her phone with her. So me as a dad, I'm like, where's your tracking device? And she knew better, because she knows that I'm going to go in and do the Find My iPhone and track where she was, and at least know where she is. So she didn't, right? And that's what we have to think about from our end user perspective. Let me build this out. Is the privacy concerns, right? We have to respect the end user privacy at this day and age. So when they're bringing in their own devices, they all have geo-trackers on them. We need to be able to rationalize what's important for the enterprise and what's important for the end user, and how can we blend those two together. For the longest time, and I've been doing MDM and EMM for 6 or 7 years, at the beginning, IT said, it's great, it's awesome, we know where the user is, they better be behind their desk, we're going to track them, and we're going to bring the hammer down if they're not behind the desk. And this got really crazy. So 6 years ago, I was called into a big insurance company in Texas. And the first question was, does your product do geo-tracking? And I said, absolutely yes, it's just like everybody else's, but better. And they said, we don't want it, right? And I was shocked, because it was one of those cool features that everybody puts up at the top of the EMM piece, geo-tracking. So hopefully I was smart enough, and I think I was. I said, why don't you want geo-tracking? And they said, well, John, we had a sales guy in a bar on Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. He got in his car and he hit somebody. The person he hit got a really smart attorney and figured out that we use geo-tracking software on the mobile devices. And because we're a big insurance company, we've got a lot more money than our employee does. So they went out and said, insurance company, we're suing you because you should have known where your employee was, right? So think about that privacy perspective. When all the knobs are there to turn on or off, whether it's geolocation tracking or what applications are on the device, do you need those, or are they just fun to have, right? So think about the privacy aspect, because your employees don't want to be tracked, or your employees want to be able to have that semblance of privacy if they're mixing business and their work, or excuse me, their personal life on the device. And on top of that, we have this privacy regulation throughout the world. So as you're building these policies, as you're thinking about the end user and how to manage those end users and micro-segment the device or the data center or delivering data and content to them, think about the different regulations and the compliance complexities that we have throughout the global world now. So takeaways on privacy. So this is sort of my jab at RSA, because they told us we had to have an apply slide. So I gave you an apply slide here. So the 3 things I want to suggest is understand your users. It's a dance. You can't say yes, you can't say no. You have to understand how they're working. The education, just like with teenagers, you can't just put them in a crib, shut the door, and go have a beer with teenagers anymore. They're mobile, they're highly adaptive, and they think they're smarter than you, right? So think about all of that, respect the users, and understand your environment and respect the environment. And that's my presentation, so thank you. I'll be down here.